So the program today is Stephen Adams, who lives on Alder Slope. And when I first met him, I guess I was still in the bookstore, and you were still a warrior in California.
Well, the latter is true, but you'd already have gone to the bookstore. You were doing Peter Press.
Yeah, I was. Yeah. And then over the years, I found out that not only is he a lawyer, but he also is a train guy. And I knew he was interested in music because he was taking lessons from Gail Swart at one point. And he always would show up at Gail's concerts and stuff. And then, I don't know when I found out about this pipe organ project, but it's too good a project to let loose. So I don't, he said he didn't need any screen, he didn't need any projector, and he needed his friend Bob to do some sound stuff for him. So take it away, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thanks, Rich. And thanks to Bob, because I wasn't able to bring an instrument over here the way violinists and others can do. But I did bring a soundtrack or two to give you an idea toward the end of the program of the very different kinds of music that the organ is designed to play. And that is why it's sometimes described as the king of instruments. A little sexist term, but that's the way it was for the first 500 years of organ playing. So the instrument is very, very flexible in terms of what kinds of repertoire it will play. There has been more written for the organ over the centuries than for any other instrument. And it's also used very widely in transcriptions. Some of the most famous works, for example, by Bach, who is generally considered the master of the instrument, were taken directly from violin concerti from Italy and from his own works, which he constantly plagiarized back and forth because that was the way it was done in those years. So many of his most famous violin works are also grand organ works with the same kinds of melodies, but incredibly different feeling that's produced from the instrument. So the two things I'm going to talk about today, the first is the rebuilding that I've been doing. I'm kind of the Earl McLaughlin of pipe organs in this county. Earl never met a piece of old iron that he didn't want to acquire and move onto his property and build a building for and celebrate with everybody who's willing to go up on Sunrise Road. And the same, for example, with my buddy Ralph Swinehart on Black Marble, who never met an old car he didn't want to build a building for. I've watched him build those buildings over the years. It's more important to have a new building to house the cars than it is to think about any other use for the property. And that's basically the way I have felt about what I'm doing. I'm not very far downhill from Ralph's place. When my partner Sandra Purnell, who's in the front row, when she and I got here, basically close to 30 years ago, the old Hayes farmstead, fortunately, fell into my lap, the Ted Hayes family. And so the place on Alder Slope that we have together is about 35 acres now, and it has plenty of room for bizarre buildings to do bizarre things, including an old double-arm railroad semaphore, which I also have on the property, because I'm a train man, just exactly what Rich said. And the way I'm expressing that primarily in the county, I've been on the railroad board since it was formed in 2002, and that's my primary, quote, political activity in the county. That's what I truly care about the future as expressed through our economic future. For me, it's maintaining that railroad in place because, of course, if it goes away, we'll never get it back. And 40% of the Eastern Oregon rail traffic, rail right-of-way went away in the 90s, and towns like Heppner and others really regret it. So that's been my primary grown-up focus while I can play with things like the pipe organ and music. So with that introduction, let me talk a little bit about the rebuilding thing that I did here. I now have wound up with 4 different organs at this point, 2 pipe organs and 2 digital organs. And you will know by 1 o'clock, which is my favorite, of course, in part because I've taken one of them apart again after constructing it. But a lot of hobbyists just love to do that because they would rather work on something. And for me, that was really true because I couldn't play them when I started playing with them. That came before. I mean, I'd always dreamed of doing that, but I had never gotten around to it. And so it was this reconstruction project that got me interested in finally taking some decent lessons, joining the American Guild of Organists, and traveling around the country, finding teachers and finding connections and training and meeting with the people who really do make music around the country. This is the only pipe organ at this point, actually, well, since I have two, let's just say one of them not working right now because I've taken it apart. The one that I'm using now, and the most recent one, is the only pipe organ in the county. When I arrived here, there were none. There never had been one. And I went around to the various churches, and there were this and that digital organs that had been donated, and I tried them out, and I really missed the sound of a pipe organ. So I said to myself, well, there's only one other way. I put out the word that I was interested in finding one, and I got a communication pretty suddenly from an LDS church in Boise, which said that they had a 1947 4-rank organ, I'll explain that, built in suburban Seattle, and that when it had been installed in 1947, the tradition was that it would be there forever, and when God chose it for that church, it was going to stay. But they were deciding to go all modern and get a digital organ, and so they were throwing out their pipe organ, which worked fine, and I had 24 hours to go and get it and take it apart if I wanted it, because otherwise it was going to the dump.
Oh my God.
So I answered the call. I went right down there and took it apart. It's got, that particular organ has, Falcon Vaughn is the manufacturer. It has 2 keyboards. That's the most standard in the United States. 4 ranks, that means 4 separate kinds of sounds that it can make. The 4 classic different organ sounds. The one, which is called either principal or diapason, that is the standard metal pipe sound that you hear on most American pipe organs. The second group is strings, the sound that imitates string instruments. The third is a reed, which has a similar structure to, let's say, the oboe or whatever, where the sound comes from the vibration of the reed. And then the fourth is the flute, which is as exactly the way it sounds. That is to say, it's like 61, because there's 61 notes on a standard keyboard. It's basically like 61 flutes ready for you to play whichever pitch you choose, and it sounds exactly like a flute. So I will show you briefly the 4 sounds that I was able to generate with this organ as a standard matter. Now, the most fundamental sound is the so-called diapason or principal sound. And they get that word principal because it is the most important sound that most organists would start with, and you will hear an excerpt or two. So it sounds like this, and this is, and you can in fact simply blow it like as you would any other wind instrument, because the pipe organ is a wind instrument as compared to the piano, which is a percussion instrument. On the piano, the sound comes from something striking something. In its case, the hammer striking the string. Whereas with the organ, it is simply a matter of selecting some wind instrument sitting up there on the wall and choosing to push air through that wind instrument like this. Now you can hear a number of overtones of different sounds that a pipe like this can produce or will produce. That's just the way it's built. So it's not just the basic sound comparable to the pitch of a piano, called basically 8 foot from the old length of the longest pipe from that sound. Something like this. Now how is that tuned? By a tuner so that it matches the other pipes in the instrument. And on this particular type of pipe, it is done by changing the length of this little top part here. If I pulled it out, it would lower the pitch and the pipe would sound lower. If I push it in, it shortens the pipe and it causes it to play at a higher pitch. And one of the tasks constantly on overslope is tuning the pipe organs. And this pipe organ, this first one that I built, rebuilt, the Vulcan Bond, had about 400 pipes because it's 61 times the divisions, which in its case had 4 divisions, 4 different types of sound, plus the pedals, and I'll talk a little bit more about the pedals. Now, what difference would there be if I changed the pitch? And so I will change the pitch. I didn't bring the longest scrap paper pipe, it would have been as high as that. But I will now play one of the higher notes of the same sound group that this guy has. So listen carefully.
If you're over 70, you can't hear it at all.
Right. That is not the highest pitch on the organ. The highest pitch on the Vulcan Bond organ is about 1.5 inches long. It is absolutely tiny. And that is the variety of pitch that you generate with full control on the keyboard, because the keyboard has what are called stops. That is to say, to select the type of sound, for example, to select this diapason or principal sound as compared, let's say, to the flute or the reed. But it also has couplers. And the couplers join one keyboard to the other to amplify the sound. And so you can change the volume of the organ by, according to some other factors, whether you put one manual in conjunction with another so that you're playing, in effect, 2 different sets of pipes at the same time. Now, the other thing that you can do with the couplers is to join different octaves together. In other words, you can join this sound and that sound together, and also the intermediate pitches, 1 octave higher, 2 octave higher, 3 octave higher, 3 octaves higher, and that enhances the sense that you're hearing a full spectrum of sound. And those are all controlled by the organist, along with, on some organs, an expression pedal. A pedal that actually closes a wall of sound, of wood around some of the pipes to make them quieter. And my particular organ, the one I got from Boise, had a set of shutters, as they're called. A wall of sound, or a wall of non-sound, a wall of wood with shutters, physical shutters. And the shutters are designed to turn, to close and open as the organist plays that separate pedal. And the reason that is done is to make the sound of the enclosed pipes much quieter. And that's used widely in more modern music, where composers are trying to imitate the sound of an orchestra that gets louder and softer, or a composed organ piece where the composer, particularly the later French composers, want to make the sound change in volume. The Germans have never been fond of that. And I just disabled the shutters on the organ that I installed. And then on my second organ, which I'll talk about a little bit later, there isn't even a box like that, because the German tradition says, don't bother with that. Instead, install a second little organ next to the big one and play that one from a third keyboard. And so that's how they handle that. And they often put it behind the organist, and so it has a German name that implies that it's standing behind the organist, and it gives a different kind of sound in a room. You're getting the feeling that I really love the German Lutheran tradition, and that's where my heart is. There's no question about it. It truly is. I was not raised as a Lutheran, but I am completely enamored of that sound. The French love things that are more grandeur, especially as they would want you to call it. They're full of louder reed sounds. They're full of lots of variations of imitating the birds and a variety of other wonderful things that you can do with the organ. The German Lutheran tradition is a very strict one, but based on the work that Martin Luther did as a composer, and taking old drinking songs and converting them into precious hymns, which was his favorite activity. And no one can remember the drinking songs, but the hymns resonate, especially through the grand work that Johann Sebastian Bach was able to do to integrate those hymns into his really, not only his organ works, but his very biggest pieces for choral work that we celebrate. So I'll give you the two other sounds with the organ. Here's the string sound. This happens to be a dulciana, as it's called, but there are a variety. There's the viola, there are the la celeste, and some others. But this one, this is also a very quiet sound.
I didn't hear that.
But the tone, the timbre, is slightly different. The tone, the design here is to imitate the sound that a string instrument of a variety of pitches. Of course, we're not just talking about violins or violas de gamba or cello or double bass. As the pitches of these pipes change, you will get sounds that are more similar to varieties of string instruments. Now finally, the fourth sound from the fourth main group is the flute sound. Most flutes are made of wood as opposed to the principal sound that you get out of the metal pipes. And the flute also has an opening here, just like the diapason sound, which is where the actual sound comes out. It doesn't come out at the top. And in fact, that's also true of the metal pipe. The important point, the lip here, is where the sound comes out, and the way that the type of sound, the timbre, is produced is by changing the way this is shaped, like the human mouth. But the pitch is determined within a fairly wide range for any given pipe by the position of this little insert which goes in the top. Because there's a feature of flute pipes that if you stop them, they play at one octave higher than they would if you didn't have a stopper. That's, again, a property of the way wind operates through wooden pipes. I have it set right now, but I could move this up and down, and if I moved it up and down, it would be similar to what we did on the diapason pipe. If I push it down, I'm going to make this whole thing shorter, and that's going to raise the pitch. If I pull it back, almost to the point where it comes out, as long as it can still stop the sound, it is going to lower the pitch. Now, fortunately, Sandy and I keep our farmhouse, which is the separate house that where we are housing these instruments. We can keep it at a pretty constant temperature through the year. But if we didn't do that, the pitch would change dramatically with cold and warm. And of course, in our county, that's going to happen unless there's some kind of way of controlling it. So the farmhouse I had to choose to rebuild it from the very beginning when I moved on the property. When I moved on the property in 1990, after seeing it first in 1998, the farmhouse was almost gone. It's the old house, about 125 years old now, where Ted Hayes was born, and that whole generation, Steve Hayes and Ted Jr. and the others were raised. That farmhouse was almost gone. And so I said I would like to rebuild it from scratch. It had no foundation, had to start from scratch. That was about the same time when I got the call from the Boise LDS Church. And since I had to move it here within 24 hours, if I was going to have it at all, I had to take it completely apart. And because the Lord had designed it to stay there forever, it had 500 green wires connecting the console, or the playing part, with the organ itself, which is the wind chest that contains the blower and the pipes and so on. I had to disconnect them all and try to figure out how I would have any hope of reconnecting them intelligently. Modern organ design says don't do that kind of thing because we know that our life is transient these days. When I rebuilt it with coded telephone cables so that I would have some idea what I was doing. But I had to figure out what that code would be in order to rewire it. So there were definite compromises with the modern world to rebuild something, even just because I had to move it, let alone whether I had a tired blower that needed replacement or whatever. And so I will show you a few pictures in a minute of how that happened. But suffice to say that to rebuild it means not only the various parts, but asking whether they still work. And the lower, in the LDS church, where I brought it out, the longest pipes, which are 16 feet long, wooden flute sound, 16 feet means that it is 1 octave lower than standard pitch, because the standard would be defined as a so-called 8-foot pipe. The 16s I have in the room on an alder slope in the farmhouse. I didn't bring one over here because it would be pretty big. That would have been fun, maybe next time. Those pipes had to be mounted in the Mormon church, and boys, they had to be mounted sideways because 16-foot pipes wouldn't fit in an 8-foot room designed for an LDS ward. I was able to turn them over by having a cathedral ceiling by removing the top floor of the old farmhouse when I put in the bases. So there is enough room now for 16-foot pipes. Those particular pipes right now are not actually playing because they're part of the organ that I decided to take apart in order to make room for its successor. So let me walk through it again for a minute. The difference between these two major types of organs. The pipe organ, being a wind instrument, blows through the various pipes. Digital organs have nothing to do with actual wind. They are just various kinds of basically computer chips that are designed to make a particular imitation of a particular sound. They can get pretty complicated these days, and they can make some very interesting sounds and a much wider variety of sounds if you're willing to accept that they're imitations and recreations of various well-known organs or even brand new and totally different sounds. So I have some interest in that, in the different kinds of sounds they can make. And one of the current movements is to have a pipe organ that has MIDI or a digital connection of some kind, maybe with a separate little box so that it can produce many more types of sounds from the same keyboard as the pipes would produce. It's a kind of a hybrid organ. And I haven't tried to do that yet, but who knows, these things may happen. I do have 2 digital organs. I have a 3-rank organ from Rogers that looks like what you could kind of expect it to look. It was going to have all sorts of bells and whistles and such. This thing uses only speakers. There are no pipes. I could hook the pipes up to this guy, but right now I'm just enjoying myself with my classic German spout organ I'll show you toward the end.
Steve, excuse me, where does a pump organ fit into this?
What's the what?
A pump organ.
Okay, a so-called reed organ or pump organ, the kind you see in Grandma's house, uses only reeds. It does not use pipes and small sets of reeds. And it does have stops, that is to say, drawbars that enable you to shut off the sound of some of those reeds so that you can only hear the ones that you want. And so that takes me to the question, though, of the pumping. Now, in the classic era, no electricity. The only way to put the air through the pipes for an organist was to have a boy of 11 years old who was in training, who would stand next to the organ and pump the bellows. And every pipe organ does in fact have a bellows. The question is, are you going to have a little boy standing there doing that, or are you going to install an electric blower? And universally, the compromise now, almost universally, is to go for the electric blower. So even organs, modern organs that are imitations of Bach's time, which do not, in fact, use electrical connections between the keys and the pipes, even those organs now have a modern electric blower to save having to recruit one of the 11-year-old boys somewhere in the county and give them a child labor job that would otherwise be a lot of fun to have around, but we haven't done that. So I've given you, did I forget to pull this guy?
And the pipe organ?
Pardon?
The pump organ? What is that?
The pipe organ.
The pump.
Oh, the pump organ. Well, the pump organ is strictly pumping. The organist herself would do the pumping.
Yeah.
There are two pedals below her, and while she's trying to figure out how to play the hymn and put up with the outrageous pastor that has just ordered her to play something she doesn't like, she is pumping away with her feet, trying to keep that going at the same time. It is a total one-person job. Also pulling the stops, of course, because those instruments did not have any other types of ways of changing the sound as you play. Modern organs typically have a set of what are called pistons. And as you push the button, it changes your presets of the sounds that you want. So you can start a piece, let's say with the diapasic sound, and then at some point you either use your foot on a special pedal or you push with your finger as subtly as you can, and the whole sound will change because you have preset the new sound you want. Now classic organs that are, when I say classic, I mean even modern ones that are designed to model the way a Bach organ would play, they're not going to have any of that. And so that's where you see organists struggling to pull stops and so on, and that's what I do, because the organs that I prefer don't have that kind of mechanism. Now that's the classic flute sound, and if it sounds to you like a bass recorder, that's because it's the same. It's the same as a group of people who play their little recorders, whether they are a small social group, such as my mother organized in California many years ago. She called her recorder group the Lethal Chamber Music Society. And they had a lot of fun playing their recorders together, and that's what I do. I play a lot of recorders together when I select the flute division, as it's called. This is one whole division, is the flutes. Another division is the strings, another division is the diapason, and another one would be the reed sound. Now there's another feature in these organs that is artificially introduced. It's called a tremulant. And the way it works in a pipe organ is it changes the wind pressure. So the wind pressure is not constant when you have the tremulant on. And that's what it does, is it gives a trembling sound to the instrument. Now you've heard this when a string player wiggles her fingers. Okay, she's changing the pitch, and she can do it either rapidly or slowly. She can change just a little bit of the pitch, or she can change quite a bit of the pitch. And the tremulant on an organ performs a similar function. Typically, the tremulant will be on only one or maybe two of the divisions, and you can choose whether you're going to use it or not. We'll hear it toward the end. We're going to hear one piece that is using the tremulant, and it can be a very subtle matter. It's not usually note by note the way it might be with a violin. Instead, it is attached to that division while it's on, although the organist can turn it on and off by pulling that particular stop. The word stop comes from the fact that you start with a pipe organ with all the pipes ready to play, and then you choose to stop all the ones you don't want to have sounding. So the phrase pull out the stops means to disable the stops by pulling the lever out. When you pull the lever out, it no longer stops the sound for that particular pipe or that particular division or that type of organ. And so when I pull out all the stops, I'm giving it more and more and more sound. That's where that phrase comes from. But if I want to stop a sound, I start with the idea that they're all off. And I only pull out the ones that I want to give a sound to. Now notice how that can affect not just the choice of the type of sound, but also the volume of the sound. In other words, the organ does not have to have a soft pedal the way the piano would. It doesn't have to have or offer the opportunity of changing the way you actually touch or play the key. Instead, you use other methods for changing the sound level. And one of the most important is the stops, although you have to be careful there because you don't necessarily want to change the type of sound that you're hearing. But another way of changing the sound level is adding the couplers that give you an octave higher, or another octave higher, or another octave higher. That's also going to change the sound, but it's also going to change the volume. So it's a complex instrument to play. Now, a couple of other differences between those who've had some familiarity with the piano. With the piano as a percussion instrument, there's going to be quite a bit of control, if you're good, of the type of sound that you get for each striking. Typically with the organ, there is not that kind of tactile change. Because with most pipe organs and most digital organs, in the last 200 years, it has been an electrical connection between the keyboard and the electronic valve, or the electric valve, that opens to allow the air to go through the pipe when you pull out the stop. Now, those organs are, in that sense, very primitive as far as your finger control is concerned. Nothing like the piano, nothing like the importance on the piano of developing your little finger so that you can really have that sing. You push it down and it changes an electrical switch one way or the other. In that sense, even classic pipe organs for the last 100 years have been, quote, digital in that sense, on or off. Now, why did I take this particular Valkenbaum organ apart? It was playing fine. It's because I wanted to make room when I got interested and was taking some lessons and enjoying myself doing that. I wanted to try to work with and have a tracker organ. Now, what I mean by tracker, mechanical action only, is it does not have any of those electrical connections between the keys and the pipes. The only electrical thing in a tracker or mechanical organ, if you really want to compromise, and I did, is an electric blower instead of an 11-year-old boy. So a tracker organ, the quote modern organ movement, that is to say the movement to return to the kinds of organs and sounds that Bach would have played, is to have mechanical connections only between the key and the valve that opens for the air. That's why it's called a tracker, is because a series of tracking pieces of wooden rod connect directly and mechanically the key as it is pushed down with the opening of the valve. Opening physically of a valve, not an electric control. Now, that offers a return, or if you will, because it was true of Bach's era, they were all mechanical organs then, to serious finger control. Because as you press down a key on a tracker, you hear you have the ability to change the way the valve opens, the physical valve opens. It's not just on or off, it's do I press a little differently here, and in particular is my release a little bit differently, because releases and timing of releases on the organ are extremely important. There's no sustained cut. You're either playing it or you're not playing it. And with a tracker you do have a little bit more control of that. Organ music is written in a way that emphasizes the agogic accent, the difference between a slightly earlier stopping of playing that note and letting a little bit of breathing time happen before you play the next one. And that's not exactly the same as the difference between legato and detached playing. It's a slightly different element of that. And it comes because the organ cannot just let you hear the sound die away. It's either on or it's off, and that's true of pipe organs or digital organs, with the slight exception on a tracker of being able to change a little bit the way you lift your finger from the key and let the air kind of dissipate or become lower in volume. Now that's very intriguing, and it has given rise to a whole movement in the last 35 or so years of changing in new installations to organs that are trackers. It's by no means universal, but it's a very strong movement, and it's one that I have begun to subscribe to with great interest. And so I have. Let me show you just a few pictures then of the organ that is now in residence. And I had to measure very, very very carefully to see whether it would even fit. I discovered it where I was working with one of my teachers in Princeton, New Jersey, at the Princeton Early Keyboard Center. And Sandy was doing art at the, in Princeton and New York at the time. And when my teacher and I were starting to look for an interesting track organ, we found one in the balcony of a defunct Roman Catholic church in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It had not been played for about 5 years because the church had to sell the church and put the organ up for sale to pay off some unfortunate debts that you've probably heard about in the last 12 years. So the church was defunct and was being sold to some Presbyterians, and the organ was for sale because the Presbyterians didn't want it, they had their own. And I went there with my teacher and we played it, and suffice to say it's a very different type of organ from the Balkan Vaughn organ that I had rebuilt. And I'll pass this picture around. Here's my teacher demonstrating it or giving it a try and so on. And then here's the pedal board, which also gives you an idea of what that can feel like. We haven't talked specifically about the pedals, except to say that the pedal pipes model and follow the same design as the manual pipes. The only real difference is that they are an octave lower than if you played the same pitch on the manuals. It's just a way of giving a deeper sound that you can couple or uncouple from the manual sound. Now that extends dramatically because if you add 32-foot pipes and 64-foot pipes, you can extend the range down. Literally, it does go below what most humans can hear. So the organ produces sounds like this that are higher than those of us septuagenarians can possibly hear. And organs can and are built, if the church is big enough and has enough money, to have resonating sounds that are 64 foot, that people can't hear. And that's why they don't have the money to buy one, is because the people who are rich enough to pay for them can no longer hear those kinds of sounds.
That one goes forward.
Can you give me an idea? So the piano is 88 keys.
Yes, piano has 88.
So what are we talking about? Like, if that were a piano,
Mhm.
how much for, is it another 2 feet?
About 8 octaves on a piano.
That,
About 8 octaves.
right.
Yeah. You're going to find 8 middle Cs on a piano, and each one of those is a higher sound by 1 octave, 8
Right.
notes.
And so where does this organ go?
Okay, well, the organ would have a far greater pitch coverage than that. Yeah, well, a really elaborate organ could have 12 octave. 12 octave difference. And one organist is changing all that and choosing at any given time, yeah.
Given the provenance of the Catholic organ, I think getting an 11-year-old boy somehow involved is not
Absolutely.
That's not a question, Terry. That's not a question.
Well, the other way to go, I have 1,400, or about 780 pipes on the second organ that I'm going to talk about. So to get 700 11-year-old boys, each one assigned to a particular pipe, that would be another way of doing it. Like a choir, you would say, okay, over here, and over here, and that group would then play those pipes. So it could be a full employment act. There's no question. Okay, now I'm going to show you some pictures of this new organ, and then we'll close with hearing a few of the sounds of these. This is a series of 4. Oh, yes, Judy. Yeah. Okay, the question is, are the couplers, do they work the same as they would on the 2 manual harpsichord? The answer is yes. In Bach's era, there were no pianos. They came just after Bach. And he was designing most of his keyboard works either for the organ or for the clavichord or the harpsichord, depending on which art patron was willing to pay him a few guilder to do it. The Goldberg variations are named for the count that was willing to pay him for a few shekels so that he would write for that instrument. And that happened to be the harpsichord. But he would write for anybody who would pay him, and more. So the harpsichord couplers work the same way, even though the harpsichord is a plucked instrument as opposed to a blown or wind instrument. If you have two manuals, you can tell the instrument by pulling a physical lever to move the pluckers to the point where they will pluck more than one string at the same time. Most harpsichords, and there's a big new movement for restoring the harpsichord, most of them are still one manual harpsichords, which was a classic also design. The double and even the pedal harpsichord is an elaboration rather than the way the standard was. Now these four pictures, and I'll just put them around in sequence, and they'll go along 1, 2, 3, and 4. Show you this organ that we found in Pennsylvania, which we had moved here when I was finally able to be sure that there was just enough space in even a farmhouse with a 24-foot ceiling to accommodate this organ. Now picture number 1 is the main group of pipes. Those are the manual pipes played from the manual, the 3 divisions that I have. I don't have leads on it, unfortunately, I would like to. The third picture, which I'm giving to Kate Margaret here, is the blower. Yes, compromise, has an electric blower. And this organ also has a tremulant, but the way the tremulant works, it's because it's all mechanical, is it opens a little hole so that part of the air can escape. Very simple physical design, and it has to be physical because there's no electricity. There's no fancy way to change the sound. Here's how the stops are changed. Picture number 4. Yes, Rich?
Just backing up a minute, what were the pipes made of in box time and what are they made of now?
Okay, what are the pipes made of in box time? They're made of exactly the same as they are now when we can get the metal. The metal pipes, these guys, are an alloy of primarily tin.
Pardon?
Primarily tin.
Zinc.
Yeah, the most
Tin.
Metal pipes can be a variety of alloys and mixtures. Wooden flutes are virtually always wood.
Okay.
But you can mix those sounds. There are diapason sounds that you can produce with wood and so on, and people experiment with different kinds of sounds, especially if they want a lot of choice. They will have a lot of space and a lot of money. They'll build some other way of making that similar sound in order to give it a slightly different timbre or the emphasis that they want to give it. Now, I played you one flute, I'll play you the other. I just took these as representative samples. Now, that might sound different to you, but it's actually physically the same kind of sound. It's only the difference of the pitch. And the same little guys, and I have ones that are smaller than this, also have the pitch adjusted through the top. And they also have this peculiar feature that it's a physics principle, that the sound can be changed by an octave by stopping it or unstopping it. And so that has a powerful effect on design and how they work. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about this organ, and then I'll play 2 pieces before we finish.
I have one more question there. Is
Lisa.
there a difference in the response time between a tracker and one like?
Okay, the question is, Lisa asks if there's a difference in response time between a tracker and a mechanical. And the answer is yes, there is a slight difference, depending on how it's built and how long the rods are. Because remember, a tracker organ cannot have a separated console from where the pipes are. Now, the classic American philosophy, particularly among Protestants, the Roman Catholics didn't sing, so they didn't bother much with decent organs in America, because the priest did everything and the congregation was just supposed to sit there. That's changed since Vatican II, but that's very recent. The Protestant tradition was instead to have a powerful organ that would support congregational singing, but we had to be ashamed of it at the same time, so we locked it behind a bunch of cloth in a corner of the sanctuary instead of putting it out prominently where everybody could gloriously appreciate it. If you've seen pictures of modern installations of good organs in concert halls and so on, you've now seen a grand display of the pipes sitting right up there for full view, no matter what else is going on in the place. But that's modern. The whole idea, the traditional Protestant idea was that, and if you go into a traditional church that still has a pipe organ, you will see the organ. Well, more precisely, you won't see the organ. You might see the organist, but probably not. She's probably been parked behind some kind of a screen where she can't see the choir, they can't see her, that whole thing. The modern movement is to get away from that and say, let's enjoy it. But the classic style is to hide it away. And that's the so-called American design. And the American organ was designed, pipe organ, over the last 100 years, was designed to be able to play anything at all that the congregation could afford. We had to have an organ that was a compromised organ in most cases because people couldn't afford like a whole German division and a whole French division. So we have to have something that is basically this fundamental sound almost all the time and repeated over and over as the fundament of what we're going to play in this church. The modern approach to put the organ out there where you can really see it and celebrate it is quite recent. And it's part of this movement to go back, and many of them are now trackers, to go back to the way that the Bach organ would have sounded. Now, let me give you an example as we near the end of the difference between the philosophies between the German style and the French style, which are the two traditional and most important repertoires for the organ. There is a minor interest, and has been for 500 years in Spain, to some extent also in England and in Italy, and they have made significant contributions. But by far the overwhelming contributions for the literature of the organ are either German, are German and also French. And they are both very grand traditions that people have tested and analyzed and explored for centuries. It's a very, very rich musical history. The French sounds tend to be more grandiose, more full of rich sounds that really explore the tonal varieties of the organ to their extreme, whether it's Messiaen's pieces imitating bird sounds, particularly celebrating events like the crowning of some of the kings and so on, with glorious uses of trumpet imitations through the reeds to make them sound like various orchestral instruments. The Germans have been more content with emphasizing the classic sound of the organ and the organ pipes, stemming from Luther's, although the organs were around before Luther, but he wanted the simplicity of the faith to come through the sound of the organ and supporting the singing of the church. Nevertheless, there are some very important differences that I can show you, even with the limited number. I only have 14 ranks on this second organ. It was manufactured in Montreal in 1979 by the Casavant organ builders, a well-known organ design company in Montreal. And it has 14 different sounds called ranks, that is to say sets of pipes. The first organ I had, the Balkan, that had 4 sets of sounds. This one, although it's still using these 4 groups, it is organizing them in different ways to give 14 different ways of playing them together. And so that's why it's called 14 ranks or groups of sounds. Now within those, can one demonstrate through playing or choosing the stops to vary the feeling? The Germans call it the affect. What kind of effect in English do you want to draw out of the listener or the singer or the pastor who's sitting up there all complaining about the cost of the organ. How do you want that person to feel? And what emotions do you want to draw out of that person? Now, the organ, as do all musicians, uses tools like major and minor, loud and soft, that sort of thing, legato and staccato and detached. Part of the modern organ movement with the German style is to return to a detached sound. That is to say there's a bigger gap between one note and the next, giving the opportunity for the organist to stress the accent as you stretch the silence between notes. And legato is the other classic approach, and the French have been traditionally much fonder of that. It says, play each note right after the one you just played. Now, that's a wild generalization, but you can see, or hear, or more precisely, when you start to listen, you can hear the way the organ has to handle this difference is different from the way other instrumentalists handle it, because with the piano you have, the sound can stay there for a minute while you choose the next note. The organ, that's not possible. So these are some of the differences that this plays out. Now, let me, in the last few minutes that we have together, I'd like to give you a slight sensation. And why don't we try number one, and this is me simply demonstrating some of the ways in which the sound is created by multiplying these controls. Now remember, I couldn't change the sound or the volume of any individual pipe. It's got to be done external to that. So let's try track one.
We start at section 1 with the main manual.
Now, you may not be able to hear me, so I'll talk over myself.
This is the quietest sound on the organ.
Okay, the quietest sound on the organ. This is basically flutes at concert pitch, as it's called, 8-foot or piano equivalent pitch. Nothing fancy, no higher.
Add to it now the sound of the second flute from.
Now, with the organ, you can add either a higher sound of the same group, or you can add other groups. Now, I switched keyboards, and this is a different set of flutes.
So those are two flutes.
This organ has two different sets of flutes. The difference is very subtle.
And then the next sound will add a tremulant to those two flutes together. And you'll hear a slight wavering of the wind in the air. It's a very subtle difference.
And you couple two flutes, you not only change the sound, but you add that dimension where your ear is trying to decide which flute to listen to, which gives it an excitement to it.
A diapason sound, and that would come at an octave higher than what we were just listening to.
So now we're coupling a different sound, an octave higher.
Flute.
We'll continue the concert pitch, but we'll add another octave.
And then we would add to that a principle of our diapason sound at 4-foot. That is to say, it would sound at one octave higher than it is playing.
Now, it takes a little while for your ear to even want to find out what's going on, but emotionally you notice the difference.
Added to that can be another octave higher, the so-called 2-foot.
Now, introduce the so-called 2-foot that's played 2 octaves higher as well as 1 octave higher. And it is designed to affect you emotionally, because people aren't going to sit there with their little sound meter and determine pitches. They're just going to say, wow, that was interesting, or it encouraged me to sing, or it's out of tune, or whatever she's going to say. Which is constant. Constant. Okay, let's cut off number 1 and get ready to play number 2. And 2 and 3 will play in sequence. Okay, what I would like to do now as a closer is to give you a feel, the best I can, considering that it's too difficult to bring the organ over here, but I'm extending an invitation to any of you who want to come up on Alder Slope and do a field study of what these things actually sound like. Seth did a recording of one of his albums in the Music House about a year and a half ago. And so others of you know something about it or have seen the organ. I'm also on board with the Valley Music Alliance, and we can meet there sometimes too. But I want to show you what you will notice as a pretty subtle difference, but it's what the organ can do, even a fairly small organ. These are two German chorales. Well, they're German chorales, but one of them is played in a modern French style, and the other is played in a classic German style. And one of them is from the 18th century, and one of them is from the 20th century. One of them is legato, and the other is detached, where there is space between the notes. And that space changes depending on the player and so on, depending on whether you want to give a particular accent to a particular beat within a measure. The classic style Bach and Buxtehude tended to write in common time to give the emphasis on beat 1 and beat 3 in common time, for example. And in triple time, triple meter, the emphasis would be different. And the way you would emphasize that would be way a little bit longer to play certain notes than you would to play certain other notes. In other words, they'd be detached, but they would be detached by different amounts. And this gets to be very subtle, and people attend conventions and argue about it all the time, So nothing's changed in that respect. Okay, the first one, I'm going to play them in reverse chronological order. I'm going to play one from 1932 by Marcel Dupré, who wrote it as a teaching piece for students who wanted to, French students who wanted to learn to play German chorales. So this one is in a minor key. He wants you to be sad. And the reason he wants you to be sad is he's singing about the crucifixion. And he's playing to develop that mood through various techniques. The dragging of the feet through the legato, the sadness of the injustice of it all through the minor key, and other techniques that you'll hear. And the text reads, just so you'll understand what's going on, Christ who sanctifies us all, yet himself was sinless, was for us in the dead of night seized as an evildoer, led before malicious folk, for false accusation, cruelly mocked and spit upon. Listen to that sound when you listen to this. As the scripture tells us, the conclusion is that's the way it always was going to be. And isn't that just the way it is in the world? Marcel Dupré. Now, right away, we'll go right into one with a very contrasting affect or feeling, and it's designed that way. This is by Zachau, who was one of Bach's teachers in the 1800s, and playing in a classic Lutheran German chorale style. And this one comes later in time, but not by much, just a few hours. Namely, it is a resurrection and a resurrection chorale. And it reads as follows, and so you will hear the change in the second piece that I play. You will hear the change between the dolefulness of the first part in D minor, and you will hear it move to D major with the event of the resurrection. And we're going to hear in music what's called the Picardy third. It's called a change from the minor at the very end of the piece into the major in order to give a feeling of uplift and celebration. And the text of this one reads, Christ lay in the bonds of death, given for our sins. He is again risen and has brought us life. For this we should be joyful, praise God, and be thankful to him, and sing hallelujah, hallelujah. So just listen and see what the feeling is that the first one generates in you, and compare it to the feeling that it generates you with number two. And that's what it's all about. It isn't understanding the words. It's what is this organ trying to evoke in me? coffee here.